Okay, so I've probably got the worst slot, haven't I? Because everybody's going to be really, really hungry and wanting to get some food, which smells really delicious out there. So I don't think we've got a very long session, but I really wanted to take this opportunity to talk about EAPs. I've been in employee benefits for coming up to 20 years now, and when I first started in the industry, really a lot of the employee benefits focused on solving a problem when things went wrong. So if we go back to the early days of income protection, there was a lot of focus on claims and what happens if an individual goes off sick, how do we help them to get better? Which is great because obviously that's a really important part of the product. But I think what we've seen change over the last 20 years is the move towards being a lot more positive. And the reason that we're all here today is this sea change, I think, a really positive sea change and a focus now on well-being and keeping people well and preventing illnesses wherever possible, rather than waiting for something to happen and then trying to fix it. I think part of the challenge with the APs is, and it's a multifaceted thing, that they are seen as something to fix the problem once it's started. So that's really what I wanted to talk about today. So fairly relaxed. If you've got any questions, then throw them in, or I'll be around afterwards to have a chat. So I think all of us in business these days, we are always looking to provide reassurance, return on investment, value for money to the people that make those decisions and those investments in our companies. And I'm sure that many of you in here will have conversations with your FDs, your CFOs, for anything that needs to be implemented, whether it's new or it's to reassure them that something that's been in place for some time is actually really good value for money. And I think this is an initial problem that we have with when we actually try and look to show the value of an EAP. If you imagine you're selling this to your FD for the first time, we say, well, how do I show me the money, show me where this is working. And what you tend to find is that take-up rates, it's actually quite hard to find general take-up rates on EAPs because a lot of companies treat that as confidential information. But I did manage to find some information out there in the world at large, but sort of more globally as well as in the UK. Well, say you get a take-up rate of 3% on your EAP, or even 10%. If you're having a conversation with an FD, does that really look like great value for money? I don't think it does. Now, I don't think that's a problem. I think it's actually that the focus is too narrow. That's quite a myopic way, that's quite a narrow-minded way of actually looking for the value. And actually, the value of an EAP is far, far broader than the usage rates that you get out of it. So I think that's the first thing I would say in trying to validate the value of these things. We do a big piece of research every couple of years into employers and employees, and we talk to them about their benefits, what's working, what's not working, what do they engage with, what do they not engage with. And we actually, for the first time, found that employees now are really, really starting to value their benefits. We had 55% of employees, this is across all age ranges, said that they either really value or value their benefits. Now that was a 25% increase on 2 years ago. And when you ask why, well, look at the change around us all. We've got change in the workplace, we've got political change, we've got economic change. People are nervous, they're worried, so they're now looking beyond their pay slip into how is my employer supporting me? And I think that's where an EAP can help if you get the engagement right from the outset. I think, going back to square one, we all know that employee communications can be a challenge. You've got a captive audience, yes, but do they really always want to engage with what you're saying? I think it was a lot easier. I used to be head of communications in a previous life, and it was a lot easier in many ways to communicate before the advent of email and all the sort of social media and things that we have now, because people are overwhelmed by messages from employers, they're overwhelmed by messages in their personal lives, people take their iPhones and their other phones into the office, so they're consuming this information all the time. But I think what I've seen and what tends to happen is, if you actually look at the words that I've highlighted in red, it's talking about problems related to work, problems related to their personal life. Impact is a really negative word. And actually, I mean, this is, I should probably be shot for actually using Wikipedia as the source of the definition, but I think it's as good as any. If you actually look at that and it talks about impact their job performance, health, mental and emotional well-being, actually, it's the health, mental and emotional well-being that impacts the job performance. But if I'm an employee and my employer says to me, I've got this great thing for you, it's going to help you with your problems, and it's going to help you with your problems, are you really actually going to think, that sounds like something that I'm really appreciating? I really, really want to have a look at that and see what else it can bring. And I think for me, therefore, it's about rethinking how we communicate EAPs. I think that can start to really unlock the value. So it's about, how do we brand them? How do we introduce them to employees and make them think differently to maybe how we've talked about them in the past? So I'll talk about some of the issues that I come across as both a line manager and somebody that's in the employee benefits industry. And I've had this situation where I've talked to colleagues about the benefits of connecting with different aspects of the EAP, and these are the things that actually are in employees' minds. They think that their manager is going to find out. They think HR are actually tracking it. They don't believe it's confidential. Now, that in itself, I think, is quite interesting, in that if people don't trust their employer, really, where do you start? Which is another reason, I think, to go back to what we said in terms of the way that we message these out to our employees and to our workforces, is let's not talk about the negative bits to start with. Let's introduce them in a different way, in a more positive way. So I'll give you an example. I was speaking at an event a couple of weeks ago, actually, with lots of multinational employers there. And one of the guys had been to their Mexico office, I think it was, and we were talking about the 3% and the 10% that I introduced at the beginning. And they'd introduced an EAP to their Mexico employees, and they'd had a 30% take-up rate, which is like unheard of. And I said, how did you do that? And he said, do you know what? They just started off, they talked about the nutritional benefits, they talked about the health, they talked about all the really positive sides. They didn't really go in and start to say, here's this thing to fix the problem when things aren't really great. So I think if you do it that way, that's a really big opportunity. But addressing these problems is something that, and I think unless there's trust in the organisation and the line manager plays a key role, it's really, really hard to try and eliminate those, I think, perspectives. Just to add to that, we also did some research last year into financial institutions, so banks, investment banks, those kinds of organisations, and we had a feeling that EAPs weren't being used in those companies. And we found that of those employees that we surveyed, 87% of them said they had access to an EAP, yet their stress levels and the stress levels they reported back were far higher than the non-financial institutions, of whom only, I think, 30-odd% had access to an EAP. Their personal resilience and their well-being was far higher. And when we drilled a bit deeper into that, it's because they were saying, we don't want to use it. We think if we even admit to our manager or anyone in the workplace that we're not quite on it, that is going to affect our career and that is going to affect my career prospects. It's what we know in the trade as a career-limiting move. I don't know if you use that in your workplaces, but that's one of my favourite acronyms. So, this is what we're up against. So I just really wanted to give some really simple ideas and examples of what I think can work really well. And as a provider, this is what we're trying to move towards as well in terms of creating those communication messages and frameworks that actually work well in the workplace and not focusing particularly on the big red problems that we talked about. So first of all, I think normalising use of EAPs is really, really important. And actually, for me, that means, talking about the multidimensional aspects of them. Often that there'll be aspects of it that are looking at, more day-to-day challenges, find ways of bringing that to life. So something that we use as a sort of technique in marketing is to imagine a persona. And this can work for anyone in an HR role or any role that needs to create a communication that's going to make an impact. So you might say in your workforce, I'm going to have Julie, she's 32, she's just gone back to work after having a child, blah, 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 and create this persona. Think about those people that are in your workplace. And actually, by thinking about them, that really helps you to think about the aspects of the benefits within the EAP that they can make use of. So For example, what we've tried to do as well is, and I'm sure you'll hear from a lot of the speakers today, this big increase in financial well-being as being so important. Because back to what I said at the beginning, lots of people are really worried about their finances these days. Debt counselling sounds really scary, but if you actually normalise that and make that sound like something that's not embarrassing to actually talk about, then there are ways that you can get those messages across very, very positively, is what I would say. And then the other thing as well is wellness champions. Now, they might be individuals within the organisation that are just naturally good communicators. They don't need to be trained in communication, they're just good. They've got good networks in the business. And why not use them to actually be the person that's out there championing the EAP and the aspects of that work really well. The other thing I think that's really powerful, and I've seen this on other people's agendas for either later in the day or potentially earlier than now, is actually your line manager. I think the line manager is probably, for me, the single most important key in unlocking the employees' misperceptions and changing that, and actually, you know, why don't they bring these things into one-to-ones? If they're sensing that there's something that's there, help them find ways to talk about those aspects of concern that they're picking up amongst their employees. So I think it's also important to really just look at the wider aspects of well-being as well. So back to what I was talking about at the beginning, finding those positive ways to communicate so that when people do have a problem, they will actually think, oh yeah, I can remember I sort of used that aspect of that EAP. I went there and I got some help with childcare or whatever it might be. And look at that bigger picture, and then employees can see it's not just about, you know, a Fitbit or a step counter or whatever, because I think another dimension that we've seen is that you tend to find that if you are focusing just on the physical side, it tends to be the ones that are already really fit and want to do 10,000 steps a day and want to do all that competitive stuff that engage. There's probably a large part of the population that for them, they're like, do you know, that's not me, I haven't got time, I'm not going to be looking at that. So back to what I said at the beginning, I think there are a number of aspects that you can measure when it comes to actually demonstrating the value and either making a business case or verifying something that's already there. Notwithstanding, people feeling cared for being really, really important. So the survey that I mentioned, we can do some regression analysis that enables us to link people's thoughts about their organisation to how they feel in terms of their engagement. And what we found actually was if people think that their employer cares for them, for every 1% increase in them feeling cared for, you get a 9% increase in engagement, which is significant. That to me is evidence of value. If they feel that they've got a caring manager, it's even higher. It's 12%. I can share these with people if they put the information out there afterwards in terms of where to get this information. I'm more than happy to share this with you guys. And then the other one that I wanted to mention, and I think it's a particular theme for today, is the aspects within an EAP on financial well-being. We were absolutely stunned by that. For every 1% increase in financial well-being, so employees feeling in control of their finances, it doesn't mean that they need to feel rich or well off, just being in control, there was a 19% increase in engagement. So it's really, really significant. We had a lot of employees saying to us in the survey that they're distracted at work because they're worrying about money. How can an EAP help with that? You know, make it normal, make it okay to talk about these things. I think there's a lot to be said for the way that Americans have approached these things for a long time, because it's okay to have those discussions and not leave people in fear of their jobs or damaging their career prospects. So that's really all I wanted to talk about. Claire, I don't know, I haven't seen you putting your hand up, but that's probably because my eyes aren't working that well. Do EAPs need to be renamed? I think, do you know, I was thinking about that on the horrible train journey in this morning, and I think they do, but I can't think of an alternative. So any ideas that anybody's got? A classic example, do you know the example of kiwi fruit being rebranded? So they were originally introduced as Chinese gooseberries. So if you actually, bear with me, because this is an analogy that potentially can make sense. Everyone thinks of gooseberries as sour, unpleasant. It's not something that they want to eat unless they've got lots and lots of sugar on them and probably some custard as well. They changed the name to kiwi fruit. They're not even from New Zealand, actually. They're from China. And the sales just kind of went through the roof. And they're now one of New Zealand's biggest exports. So I think that's a great question. If you've got any ideas, I'll give £10 to the best to the best one. Would something like a lifestyle, I think a lifestyle conscious, so back is probably a similar, maybe the person that asked the first question thought about that as an answer, but I think a concierge type service is, again, it's a much more positive way of actually thinking about this. It's helping you, it's positive. So yeah, I think that's a great idea. And anything that's not a 3-letter acronym, bring it on, quite frankly.
Yeah, much more accessible.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have any other questions that they would like to? Yes.
Surveys. I didn't catch who the survey was delivered to.
So we asked 300 employers and 300 employees. We've done the survey for a few years now, so we're able to track changes. It's our employee benefit trend study. So if you go onto the MetLife website and you can't find a link, maybe pop and give me your card afterwards. We've got some hard copies outside as well. So.